Hey, you want to see something really scary?
What's your favorite scary movie?
I'm gonna scare the hell out of you.
What was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth.
What's blood for, if not for shedding?
Welcome to Fright Night.
Welcome back to Jump Scare. I'm Betty.
And I'm Chad. And today we are going to be talking to Mr. Jeff Farley about several things, starting with Equinox and his career and different things. Welcome to the show.
Welcome.
Hi, guys. Hi, how are you?
We're good.
Hello, everybody.
Glad to have you on here. How's the weather out there for you?
Hot, humid.
Oh, yeah. So basically the same.
Yeah, it's it's bearable until you get into the sun, and then you start to feel it.
That's us here, too. As long as you're inside, you're fine.
Oh, yeah. Thank goodness for AC, even though it's destroying us. We can't live without it.
Yeah.
Now, we have never seen the film before about, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, I had seen, I remember pieces of this from when I was a kid, seeing it late night and seeing different things about Equinox. And it was just one of those ones that I had vague memories of until I stumbled across it online and then was like, oh, this is that movie. And, I posted about it and then you commented on it and we started doing more research on it and found out there's a lot more to that than I realized. So
yes, there is.
How did you first come across the movie?
I'm a pretty old guy now. I just turned 62. And I was 8 years old when Equinox had been released it was released in 1970, actually. And then it did a regional across the U.S., and it didn't come to Los Angeles until March 31st of 1971. And
that's literally the day I was born.
That is amazing. Well, there you go. Now you have another connection.
That's cool.
I believe I'd seen an ad in our local newspaper, for the theatrical release, our movie section. I was kind of intrigued by it because it featured this large creature, kind of a simian type looking thing that I'd never seen before, and the caveman and a few other elements. And it just seemed really interesting to me. I mean, I was almost fascinated by everything those days. But it struck me for some reason. And it was maybe a day or two later. And I think if my memory serves me correctly, we saw it when it opened. But what I do recall is the day that I saw the film in the theater this is just open film in Los Angeles, and it's early morning. I'm having my breakfast, getting ready for school, and my mom calls me and says, come in and look at the TV, and there is this giant blue ape-like creature chasing this man through a forest, and picks up the man and beats him against a tree, and they cut at that point, and there's a close-up of that creature, and it pulls back, and it turned out it was David Allen and Dennis Muren, both on a local Los Angeles morning news program called AM Los Angeles, with a guy named Ralph Story interviewing them, and they were promoting the film. And so, of course, at that point, it was like, Mom, Dad, it's like, we got to see this. And usually I was the one that got to pick the films that we'd see. I mean, unless it was a really cool Western or something like that. Movies were most of the time I was the one who got to pick them. But so we packed up the car that night. My sister and maybe my brother and parents and I drove over to the San Val Drive-In in Sun Valley, the edge of Burbank and Sun Valley. And ironically, it's where James Cagney did his big scene in White Heat, same drive-in theater. And we saw, at first, the first feature was George Lucas's THX 1138, which my parents were probably horrified by. But my dad liked Robert Duvall anyways, so I think that made it bearable for him. But Equinox played afterwards. It was the second build or second feature, I guess. They ran the main feature second at that time, and it was like, I mean, I don't know what it did to me. I mean, there's this scene where suddenly there's a giant squid in the middle of a forest tearing down a cabin, and I was like, what is this? I was captivated by it. I mean, and at that point, I knew at that point suddenly how they had done it with stop motion, because Dave Allen that morning had been describing the principles of stop motion using the Taurus model and playing with it and moving it around. And I mean, I want one of those. I got to have one of those. And I don't know, there was something transfixing about the film for me. I mean, it all seemed like a weird dream, with Asmodeus and the ring and the book and the weird spiral vortex where the creatures would come out of, and so I don't know how soon after I saw the film I remember having a dream of me looking out, like an apartment maybe or something, or some tall building, looking out, and across the city I could see a larger version of Taurus tearing buildings up. And that was it for me. I mean, I said, okay, this is something I've got to look into. But at that time, I was like in early 1970s, and I didn't know anything about where to find anybody, or even though everybody lived around me at that time. We lived in a place called La Crescenta, and it was just north of Glendale. And Glendale's like a big film industry town. And just, so over the years, I just saw, I hadn't seen the film. It suddenly kind of disappeared. And that was sort of like, it just burned a hole in my memory. And from that point on, it was always there.
At this point in your life, were you already dabbling with drawing or doing any form of art in any medium? Because your paintings are phenomenal.
Oh, thanks.
So looking at them, I'm just like, they look like they're just gonna just come off the canvas. They're so alive.
Oh, wow.
Based on like detail and just your paint work. I mean, the technique, I'm in love with it.
Oh,
I think
thank you.
Amazing. So at this point, were you already dabbling in those kind of things, which seeing now this other form of art kind of like lit a fire in you?
I was drawing, of course. I mean, and at that point, before I'd seen Equinox, I'd already seen King Kong and Frankenstein, Seven Voyages Sinbad, and Godzilla, and maybe a few others on television. My brother sort of piqued my interest in horror in some way, because even though he never became a horror fan, he had picked up the Frankenstein Aurora kit, or the Aurora, model kit. And that was interesting for me. And I think the first one that I got was the King Kong, or no, maybe it's the Godzilla kit, when it was the pink, the kind of purple the fuchsia plastic in the long box. And so, but of course I was like into dinosaurs and anything like that. I mean, my life seemed so boring. So stuff like this spiced it up for me and made it really interesting, and so different from my grandfather is like a real cowboy from Oklahoma, and my dad didn't really have much of that, but he was into bow hunting and archery and stuff like that. And I just didn't find myself drawn into that sort of world. I mean, of course, like a lot of others, I was just fascinated with film and I mean, just watching television with, animation and, just anything that seemed interesting. But yeah, of course, I mean, and I'll tell you one thing, I was no artist then. And even then it's still, I didn't pick up a brush and put it to a canvas until, gosh, maybe it's 5 years or 6 years ago now. Again, I mean, I hadn't done it in over 30 years. And I just said, finally, one day I want to do something. And I liked it. And I thought I'd give it a try again. and I've done a bunch of them now. I mean, sold a few and some commissions, and had that one piece on Svengoolie last year. So yeah, so that was something that definitely I was into at the time, and I just never knew that if I'd ever really be able to do anything beyond that. But eventually, you meet people and you learn things, and you experiment yourself, and you just develop skills that maybe can be useful at some point in the future.
Yeah, another movie that fascinated me when I was a kid was Kingdom of the Spiders, because I was still am, huge Star Trek fan. So in the 70s, anytime I saw that there was a movie with Shatner in it, I wanted to see it. And there was some of them that, those were hard to find back in the, I'm old enough that it was still pre-VHS. You had to watch whatever came on late night cable. So you find a lot of this stuff readily. And it took me years to get to see Kingdom of the Spiders. And then I saw that was might be your first job on a movie, right?
It really was. Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you, it's like, again, I mean, and later we'll get back to Equinox, because I've got some rarities that people don't really know about. And I mean, Brock DeShane is the other guy, and Chris Endicott also, but the three of us are sort of Equinerds, but we, but I, over the years, I mean, with all of the stuff that I've done, I mean, there are some things that people don't know about the film that actually make it a little more than it really looks like. I mean, it's really an interesting story, and I want to talk about it a lot more at some point. But Kingdom of the Spiders, that came about when I met Forrest J. Ackerman, where my mom drove us up by his Acker Mansion one summer, and we stopped to it was like 1976. We stopped in, see, maybe we could say hello or something, and his assistant said that Forey was in Europe, and since we were there, they usually had people come in on Saturdays, but since while we were there, we might as well just come in. And it was great. Dennis Billows was Forey's assistant at the time, and he was wonderful. I mean, he really showed us everything, and some things we never thought we'd see. And ironically, though, there was another guy there, and it turned out that he knew my stepmother, and so they stopped and talked and stuff. It was a really odd thing, but eventually we said our goodbyes, and you sign a little guest book when you're there, so Forey knows who's been there and how to contact them if need be. And so I left all my information, and maybe it was a few weeks later or something, Forey says, "Hey, I see your birthday is in August, and specific date, August 21st, and I'm going to invite you over for your birthday." I'm like, really? Wow, what a cool.
That's quite the present.
Oh, it's wonderful. I mean, and so I got a couple of friends to go with me, and we spent the afternoon over there with him, and it was the first time I'd ever met him, and it's really wonderful. And the buzzer goes off at some point, and we hear before he just goes, "Hello," and we just say this, "Hi, it's John Landis." and suddenly John Landis walks in, and my friends and we'd already seen Kentucky Fried Movie at that point, so we already knew who he was, and we were kind of shocked and very stunned by it. But he was great. I mean, he sat there and talked to us, and he told us like everything about American Werewolf in London, even though it was still years from being shot, and said he was on his way up to Oregon to scout locations for Animal House. But yeah, it was really cool. I mean, it was like, wow, what a memorable experience that was, and I mean, just happenstance because we just decided to stop by one day. But that led to, but I'm sorry, but I want to finish that up because it led to me meeting another guy there the night that I met Ray Harryhausen at Forey's.
Wow.
And yeah, another guy was there, and it turned out that he had been working at the Berman Studios and Don Post Studios also, and he got said that he was working on this film and they might need some help. And a couple of weeks later, he called me up and said, "Hey, can maybe you and some friends come over and help?" I think we dremeled the seams off about 300 cast spiders, tarantulas, and they're not that viewable in the film, but there are some used. I don't know if they used all 300 of them, but yeah, that was sort of our trial by fire. We were supposed to get a mask from someone as a payment for it, and that never happened. So we figured that we got our full initiation into the industry. So, but it was really wonderful. I mean, it was a great experience. A guy named Douglas Barrett Jones. And if anybody has seen the issue of Famous Monsters with the Food of the Gods on the cover, that issue is dedicated to Doug. And but yeah, he turned out to be a very good friend, and we still keep in touch these days.
That's great.
Yeah.
But yeah. Getting back to Equinox, one of the things that surprised me when I watched it was I had forgotten, from seeing it as a kid, that I also was a huge fan of WKRP when it was on back in the day.
Yeah.
And the first thing I saw that, I was like, wait, is that Frank Bonner?
Yeah.
Because I was so used to seeing him as Herb Tarlick, it surprised me to see him as another character,
It is. And regardless of the name change, because Frank was born, his real name is Michael Franklin Bowers Jr. And he dropped the Michael, even though during Equinox, there's some press, when they were making the original, there's some press that lists him as Michael Kenmouth, but he decided to drop that name also. But he did Equinox under his real name. But yeah, that is him. And then about a year afterwards, or very shortly after Equinox, because that gained him a SAG card. And he was able to, he started appearing on television shows like Streets of San Francisco and The Young Lawyers. And about a year after Equinox was released, in 1972, it was in 1972 when another film called The Hoax was released, and that co-starred a guy named Frank Bonner. And so by that time he had already changed his name. And years later, it was about 1978, and I'll fast forward a little bit because by that point I'd already met Dennis Muren and Dave Allen and Mark McGee, and I was even corresponding with Jack Harris at the time. And Dennis called me one night and says, "Hey, I'm moving up north to do Empire Strikes Back, and I am going to have one more Equinox party here at my house." And he has invited me over and took a friend over with me, and where we got to see for the first time the original version. It was Dennis's personal 16 millimeter copy of the film, and it was a yearly thing for him and his friends, some of the cast and crew members, as well as friends in the industry. They would all get together and they'd screen the film and, just have a good time. And Frank was there at the party, and he was a wonderful guy. Him and his wife at the time, Lillian. And they were just wonderful people, and we got talking, and eventually Frank gave me his phone number, and he writes on the piece of paper WKRP in Cincinnati. And he says, "That's the show that I'm doing now." And he says that I'd like to invite you and your family over for any taping you'd like to come to. And we ended up going to be in the studio audience of a lot of the episodes as they were being taped live. Yeah, and we go back stage a few times, and I still have my Lonnie Anderson signature from meeting her at that point. And yeah, it was really wonderful. Frank really, was really what a wonderful guy. We lost touch eventually, and A little sad footnote, though, is we saw each other in 2006 at the Egyptian Theater when Criterion had, released the disc set, and they were having a theatrical screening of it. So, boy, everybody was there. People worked on the film, and Jack Harris was there, and Forey Ackerman was there, and I mean, they're both very, very old at the time, and Frank was there, and I went up and talked to Frank. I tried to, or at least reintroduce myself, and he didn't even seem to remember me at all. And I felt a little odd about that. I mean, I shrugged it off, but it seemed a little strange. And now I realize, though, with him passing away from Lewy body dementia a few years ago, it was probably one of the early signs of that. Even though at that point, after that, he had still went on to a pretty good career. I mean, doing television, Just the 10 of Us, I believe, and directing a lot of stuff. So, I mean, he still had a pretty good career after that, but I still really think about him at the time that we were close, and the Christmas card that he sent him and Lillian sent us was I still have
that. All right. So you say you're clearly the expert on this Equinox.
Yeah, because I mean, if you read any review of the film, I mean, almost every single review you read of the film, or just somebody talking about it, whether it's a fan review or a journalist review, the film, they pretty much, with rare exception, and they still don't get too deep. The film is pretty much generally figured out as, I mean, it's not a great film. I mean, I admit that, but it's an endearing film, and it's certainly not pretentious at all. But what was it? It was the film itself. I'm gonna have to ask you to remind me. I just lost track of what it was saying.
That's all right. Yeah, we were just talking about like the how you say like it's not a great film, but it is an influential film.
Yeah, it really was. But the thing about it is like I said, most reviews touch upon the fact that, well, they all call it a $6,500 film, which technically is true. The original film was shot for $6,500, and when Jack Harris purchased it, he paid $8,000 for it. But Jack told me in '78 that he put in over $100,000 into the reworking of the film. I mean, that's a hefty amount of money to put in, but that was because the entire film had to be overhauled so drastically. And Jack was really enthusiastic about it for some reason. He called Forey Ackerman after he bought it and said, I just bought the film that has the best special effects since King Kong. And so he was obviously very excited about it. But yeah, no, it really is.
Still, the price of it is a lot, especially back in the day. But still, the effects, we are huge practical effects fans.
Sure,
so that's what we appreciated. That scene when like the devil is like flying through the canyon and about to like land down, the look on the face, like the wings. I was like, wow, you have to appreciate that form of art because it is art, there's really so many different facets to it. It's not just as simple as someone would think, and you have to the timing, and I mean just the sculpting. I mean the whole process of it is just
the patience involved in doing that stop motion,
and that's worth more than
sure,
$10,000. It's just the effects alone. Even if the story isn't good, what came out of it?
Well, they did that original version for $6,500. I mean, they weren't paying themselves obviously for that stuff because they were. And Dave, I think Dave was the oldest one, and I think he was 21 at the time or something. And he had already been pretty adept at building stop motion models. He had actually built Taurus in the early 1960s, and that squid was built just after Mysterious Island was released in the U.S. So it was around 63 or so. So by virtue of the fact that those models existed, when Mark McGee wrote the storyline for the film, for the original film, those models were already existing and they were integral to the storyline of the film. And it was that devil that and the green giant were the only two original creatures made for the film. And in the original version, there's also a skeleton, which was supposed to represent the devil. And that was the very first stop motion model Dave, or his actually first ball and socket stop motion model that David built. And there was actually one more creature in Equinox that nobody notices because it's just in the background in the cave with the old hermit. And if you look closely, you can see a shape against the wall as the fire is flickering. It's this black shape. And that is Hua Chang's oversized black scorpion puppet.
Huh.
Made for the Black Scorpion in the 50s. And Dave Allen had purchased that along with a set of latex feet that were used in the Outer Limits episode called The Children of Spider County. And both of those items ended up in Equinox, the scorpion in the cave, and the latex feet became the feet of the green giant.
I love it when they repurpose things like that.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Yeah, they find, like, you see pictures where it's like this outfit from The Empire Strikes Back was worn in a Doctor Who episode. And I love it when people notice that and find it. Like the attention, the detail that people have where they're noticing, they're like, hey, that was from a Doctor Who episode, you know? Yeah. I love that kind of stuff.
Well, I think Mark McGee chastised Dave for buying that scorpion. He said, what the hell are you buying that for? It's, you don't need that thing. You know, Mark is that way. He's got this great acerbic wit to him. I mean, he hates Equinox with a passion. But when we met each other, I mean, my family moved from La Crescenta to Glendale sometime in the 70s, mid 70s or so, and that's when I started meeting Forey Ackerman. And it turned out that Jim Danforth only lived like within walking distance of me, and Dennis Mirren lived in Glendale also, and Dave Allen was over in Burbank, but I found Mark McGee lived only just maybe a mile or so from where I lived up in La Crescenta, and he was still up there. And I called him one day, and he couldn't believe it. He says, "It's like, you want to talk to me about Equinox?" It's like, but he was really cool. I mean, he calls me the first Equinox fan. I know Jim Pearl actually was asking about it before I was, but I was sort of like the most really young, like clueless kid, you know. So, but Mark called me one day and said, "Hey, I'm gonna go down to Hollywood, and you want to drive down with me? I'll pick you up and go to check out some of the bookstores and stuff like that, and I'll take you up to some of the locations where we shot, you know, Equinox." And that was great, sure. And we ended up at maybe it's Collector's Bookstore or something, and I was digging around and I found some stills from Equinox, and I showed them to Mark and, you know, hold them up to him, and he's like, "Equinox? You know, why Equinox? With all of the good films out there, why Equinox?" And then he holds up an 8x10 still of Pam Grier in my face and says, "This is what you should be paying attention to." But it was a wonderful day. He took me up to Bronson Cave and showed me all around that area. And then we actually went up. We didn't really go to too many locations for Equinox, but he showed me the Bronson Cave, which I'd never seen before. And then he took me up further up, just up to up to the top of that area where was part of where they shot part of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and the stairway that they run up, that Donna Winter and Kevin McCarthy run up. So of course I had to walk all the way up those stairs and back down, but it was quite an experience. It was a wonderful day. And then Mark took me back up to his place. His wife cooked dinner for us, and he showed me some personal 16 millimeter copy of a Rear Window. Never seen. You know, he says, "I'm going to show you a good film." But he also screened for me all of the bloopers and outtakes from Equinox, which are on the Criterion disc, as well as the Zargon, the H-bomb Beast from Hell. You know, which I thought was wonderful. But yeah, you know, that's what else can I say? It's like
that Bronson Cave is also the spot they filmed for the Bat Cave, right? And the Adam West.
Sure is. I mean, that is one of the most filmed caves in the world, I believe. Or it's not even a cave; it's a tunnel that goes all the way through the hill. Okay. It's not hugely deep, but it's deep enough to look deep, and then it has a split at one end of it that goes off to two smaller exits or entrances, as you want. And it's covered up now. The city has it all blocked off now. Either maybe it's still too dangerous to go in, or they just only open it up from time to time, maybe when film productions are going on. But at the time, I mean, that stuff was wide open. I've shot a few things up there from time to time also, and it's always fun to go there. It's a really wonderful location, and you know, as soon
as I saw that when I was watching, I was like, hey, that's the Bat Cave.
They got kicked out of that location too. Apparently, while Dennis and they were up there shooting those scenes, Ranger came up and found them and kicked them out. So they managed to get enough footage. And that actually, there is another in the film. They originally they used that flashback, or in the original film, it's them all meeting up at supposed to be either Skip Scheimer's house or the David Fielding character, and they're all meeting. You know, this when Susan Turner gets dropped off, and they'll meet to go off. Originally, it was a party they were going to, and then David's like, well, you know, since Dr. Waterman's place is on the way and I'm supposed to see him, let's stop there first before we go to the party. And they shot all these party scenes, and they're on the disc also, so people most likely know about them already. But there was another scene that they were planning on shooting with all the characters meeting up at the Hollywood Wax Museum. Oh. And they knew either the owner or somebody that worked there, and the owner said it would be okay for them to come in after hours and shoot. And Mark McGee writes in his revised edition of You Won't Believe Your Eyes that they got to the location, set up their lights, turned on the lights.
Oh my gosh, everything melts.
Blew out half the power in the building.
Oh.
Yeah, they blew out half the power of the building, and they never got to shoot the scene. They never got any shots in that place at all because they got kicked out of that also.
Oh, it's better than the wax melting. I was like, oh no,
the
lights.
That would have been interesting too. But yeah, no, they just I guess they just had, I guess they just brought too much with them or something. But they got kicked out of that location also.
Now, we viewed the film separately as soon as he finished watching it. What was it, last week, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He was like, you're not going to believe I finally saw this movie, and you have to watch it because there are some crazy similarities to The Evil Dead. And I was like, what? Mm-hmm. So I literally watched the movie last night and just opening credits. I'm just like, oh, okay. There's so many similarities, and I'm going to be one of the ones out there. I mean, I'm not the only one that me and you have come to that, like, oh yeah, this is definitely inspired, which makes The Evil Dead great, greater, because so influenced. And that's the whole thing. Like, the directors of the 80s were influenced from those creature features, from the 50s, and those Universal monsters, like they get all inspired by that, and they want to make their own, own art. And I mean, it's uncanny.
There are a lot of very uncanny similarities between the two films, but here's what, from what I understand and what I've heard from Tom Sullivan, who is Evil Dead's makeup effects creator, it was he who told Sam Raimi about the similarities. Apparently, Raimi knew nothing about it until Tom Sullivan said, "Oh yeah, there's this movie, that 1970 that has, all of, the demons and the devil and and the one thing that the difference is there's no Asmodeus type character in Evil Dead. I mean, they didn't. So I mean that to me sort of, I mean, yeah, it could have been a conscious decision to excise a character like that, but to me, it seems like then they might have wanted to add a character not unlike Asmodeus, but not the same, to, if it was sort of a straight, unofficial remake of it.
Yeah.
But again, it's one of those moments of serendipity, I guess, that make it really interesting. Because when Equinox was written by Mark McGee, he told me a lot of people written about the Lovecraftian influence on the original. It was just called The Equinox and a Journey into the Supernatural. Mm-hmm. But Mark McGee told me he had never read any Lovecraft at that point. He got his idea, the base idea of it came from Curse of the Demon, the Dana Andrews film, the British film with Dana Andrews, and concerning the professor, the university professor who's been given the rune that means that he's going to be the next victim of the demon, and it's that giant demon that shows up that the director or somebody said that they should never have shown, but it's really great looking. But that's where Dennis really got his idea from, because he loved that film. He said that was just his favorite film and that he was very influenced by it. But in Equinox also, those wraparound sequences that take place in the hospital were all influenced by Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So, I mean, the movie itself is derivative of other films. And in a lot of ways, you can't really help that. No. So many films are really formulaic. And I've worked on so many films, believe me, that I was working for Full Moon, and they handed me a script called Prison of the Dead, and I'm like reading it, and I get to a certain point and I go, okay, something seems really odd. And I go grab the script for Witch House, and I open it up and I'm thumbing through it, and I come across to like entire chunks of the Witch House screenplay lifted and put right into the Prison of the Dead screenplay. Well, that's economical. It's a way of saving some money.
Yeah, just remake the same thing.
Yeah, pretty much, and something for for me, it was just 2 trips to Romania. So that was that was a cool experience.
There may be other movies that have a certain similarities in regards to what would later be like considered to be tropes. You have the teenagers going, on a trip somewhere, and they end up in this case, eventually, the cabin in the woods. And, there's some shenanigans and something happens where now they have to figure it out, and they're going against evil, and it's just basically them fighting evil. So, I mean, taking it even deeper, it's, the innocent, they're teenagers. They haven't really been, tainted by, the world yet. And they're out fighting, the world's evil. That would later carry on into so many other movies, obviously, throughout the whole genre, So definitely, I mean, I would say after seeing the film, I'm defending the film. Like, this film is terrible, but it's like, you have to understand that what those people that worked on the film, they went on to go do so many wonderful other things.
Oh, sure.
Not even that, the film itself, regardless if you don't like this or you don't like that, it is a work of art. It is,
it's
someone's time, and dedication to something, and they created something. Just like you sit in front of that canvas and it's blank, there's nothing on there. You bring life to it. It's you that are going and creating something out of nothing, and that's a gift unto itself.
It really is. I mean, considering none of them knew what they were doing at the time. I mean, they're all self-admittedly amateurs at that point, and they just had a desire to do it. I mean, but I'll start with the characters in the film, and I'll start with Vicky, because she was the smartest one of the four, because she was the only one that said, "Let's get out of here." She's the only one that says, "Let's just leave. Leave the book. Let's just get out of here." The most reasonable person of the group
that always gets ignored.
Yeah, of course. And then there's David. Well, it's we can fix Susan if she we don't know what happened to her, and the book can help her. But there's just but when it comes down to the characters, they were sort of very stereotypical. And Mark told me that when he was writing the script, he was like 17 years old at the time, and so he was just kind of using dialogue that they all used on a daily basis, and he kind of felt that would give it some sort of authenticity. And he says when they got the film back and they got the soundtrack and they put it all together, he said he just hid himself. He just couldn't believe how trite it all sounded, and amateurish, and childish, and but
his world expanded. He got older, so I was just like, oh my goodness, that was me back then. Like, I can't believe.
And that was like right at the time the movie was made. So I mean, after the film, so he, ever since they made it, he's been embarrassed by it. But they there's a lot of interesting qualities about those characters, because they with the exception of Frank, every single one of the actors were dubbed. Jack Woods, of course, did his own voice, but a guy named Larry Burrell, and he was a local Los Angeles newscaster and actor, and he appeared on episodes of Columbo, and he is also the narrator of The Creeping Terror, the wonderful carpet creature film from a few years prior. And but he was given the voice of David Fielding, because Skip Scheimer, the actor who eventually renamed himself Edward Connell for the theatrical version, he had a bit of a sort of a speech impediment a bit. And if you watch the original film, you can hear it. So they had to redo the entire soundtrack for the film regardless, because they couldn't use any of the original tracks from the original. And then a woman named Joni Gerber, who was a voiceover art actor who did a lot of television animation. She was the voices of both Vicky and Barbara, I believe. I believe she was Barbara also, but for sure Vicky. And so they had to go in and redo those voices, and so it kind of gave them a little bit more of a weird quality, because when David's talking, it almost doesn't. It sounds like him. It actually sounds like you could believe the voice coming out, but then it's not. Excuse me, not the same. But yeah, it was, the characters really, I mean, they all had sort of very stereotypical feel to them for the time.
Yeah, and it's stereotypical at the time, and then as it goes on, like, you see more and more movies using those same kind of things. There's always the one that's like, let's just leave. There's the two that are just there because, we're just going to go off and have sex. And then there's the serious one that's, we need to, we were brought up here for a reason. We need to study this book or whatever and help out.
Yeah.
Purpose.
Purpose. He's got a goal. The rest of them are just along for the ride.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard some reviews. I mean, they describe the group as like the Scooby-Doo gang.
Oh yeah.
You know, yeah, they has a sort of like quality to them. But yeah, but you know, as far as the actors go, Skip Scheimer is the only actor or the only person who never really kind of went on to do anything, and I've never really been able to find much about him, but I did find some information because apparently, according to Mark, when the Criterion Egyptian screening went on, apparently Skip was invited, but he couldn't make it because he was too ill. And about maybe a couple of years, or about 2010, I found or actually it was a San Diego newspaper from about 2010 talking about a guy whose dog had gotten lost or something up to this effect. And apparently it was the guy's roommate who accidentally let the dog out. And this guy his name was Skip Scheimer, and he was described as a stroke victim. So it's possible that might have been him at the time. But as far as everybody else, I mean, of course, we've already talked about Frank because he had the most visible career of everyone. And Barbara Hewitt, who played Susan, she was the Rose Parade Queen. The year before, I believe it was 68 or 69. It was the year before the movie was released. And then she went on to become an ordained minister. She even married a friend of mine to his wife. But as Robin Christopher, her real name is Robin Snyder. She was Mark McGee's old friend, and she had been put in the role because they had hired another girl named Susan Bernard, and Mark just said she looked great, but she sounded like Shirley Temple. And he just hated the thought of her being in the movie because of that. So he convinced Dennis and Dave to replace her with Robin Snyder. And of course, Mark says that it was Dave and Dennis made him go over and tell Susan Bernard about this. And they apparently drove him over to her parents' house where she lived, and he went in, told her the bad news, and apparently her mother just made a huge stink about this. I mean, just like, how could you do this to my daughter? Oh, she's going to be a star. But they did replace her, and Mark says it's like what we didn't know at the time is that Susan Bernard's father was famed celebrity photographer Bruno Bernard, who had done like a major session with some very famous Marilyn Monroe photos, and he figured that, and within the year, but apparently within the year of them like beginning Equinox, she had already been cast in Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, and she was made a character on General Hospital.
Okay, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I was literally dying to ask you, is this the same Robin Christopher from General Hospital? Because I religiously would watch that. My mom, that was her favorite soap opera, and I watch it, and she was like Sky Quartermain. That is not the same. That is not the same Robin Christopher, because again, it was Susan Bernard who got the job. She was the one who Robin replaced. Yes. And so, but Susan suddenly she got in the business and she was working. Dennis, I mean, Marco's like, years before we even finished the film, she was already working in the industry, but Robin brought something to the character. Her and Frank really worked together, like the best characters in the film. They click together. They're the comedy duo. They're the most interesting characters in the film. But beyond that, after Equinox, she became the vocal coach for Fleetwood Mac.
because her and Stevie Nicks were best friends since they were teenagers, or maybe even before, since they were preteens or something. And it's Stevie Nicks credits Robin for her being able to find her voice. And as a matter of fact, a couple of the Rhiannon or whatever the song, I can't even pronounce it. There's a couple of tunes that Stevie Nicks wrote as a tribute to Robin. So, and then she eventually passed away. She married an executive at Warner Brothers Music and had a family, and then she passed away of leukemia, I believe. And oh boy, maybe the 80s, or maybe sometime in the 80s, I believe.
I remember now the stop motion in the film. I remember as a kid, my dad would always be watching either like Clash of the Titans or, Jason the Argonauts, which is why watching these films, especially this one, it's like, oh my goodness, like I'm obsessed with this stop motion. Can you talk about that aspect of it?
Sure. Like I mentioned before, David Allen had already built a couple of the models that they used in the film, and that demon at the end of the film was a new creation. And but all of those scenes, some of them were shot in Dave's parents' garage in Santa Ana. I think those were like mainly the squid, and the scene where Taurus chases the man down, because they're just full miniature sets, and with the miniatures by David Stipes, who went on to he had a long career in doing Star Trek and a lot of other stuff also. But all of the other scenes were shot in Dennis Muren's parents' pool house in their backyard. And because of that, because they didn't have such a large space, they had to cut any thought of using rear projection. And so all of those composite scenes are done with front projection, which was somewhat new at the time. It had been used in Forbidden Planet for some of the or maybe a few of the flying shots of the ship in space, and the Toho film Matango, Attack of the Mushroom People, used it also. It's kind of weird because there's flickers in the background and stuff suddenly in that. But Equinox is one of the first features, and it was always shot as a feature, even the original version, to utilize front projection. Although by the time it had been released in the theaters, it had been beaten out by 2001: A Space Odyssey. So, that was a really clever thing to do for them, because it gave them the opportunity to really, like, they could see right through the camera what the shots looked like. And there's probably the best use of the front projection in the film is a scene with Vicky lying on the ground, and in the background is Taurus. You can see him in the background kind of moving around. And then Susan runs, and she runs right in front of Taurus up to Vicky. And Dennis told me that he had an idea that since everything was being projected front-wise, he could maybe take some little pieces of the Scotch-Light front projection material. It's the same stuff that's used on street signs and, but he thought that he could cut some little shapes kind of based on her form and place them in various spots, during the stop motion. And lo and behold, the shot works. It's pretty amazing. I mean, it's a really gutsy shot for an amateur to do. And it worked. But all of that stop motion took, oh my God, it took them well over a year to do.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, because they started shooting in the summer of '65, and they didn't finish until 1967 with the original version. And by the time, I think it must have been late in the year or something by the time they got all the post-production work done. And but Dave handled all of the animation of the squid and Taurus, and the demon was handled by Dennis, and Dave built the model for that, and you can tell the quality of the animation is a little different. Dave's work is crude but really energetic. Dennis is a little less sure-handed, but it actually works. There's some really good shots with that demon. He really knew how to shoot things, even though he didn't have, just pretty much had like experience with shooting Super 8 and stuff like that before. Yeah. But
demon.
Yeah, there's some really neat shots, and those far off shots with the demon in the sky, those were all done by Jim Danforth's cell animation. Two-dimensional cell animation, and he built like an animation rig for them to be able to some animation stand for them to shoot that stuff on. And
that's really
Jim
cool.
Jim had also built the front projection machine for Dennis, as well as he built a thing called a nodal point and it fit on the tripod, and this allowed Dennis to get the complex moves that he needed to do to make the Green Giant scenes work, which were all done mixed scale, which is a perspective trick.
Now, there's a scene where the Book of Evil is kind of like spinning around. Mm-hmm. You own somewhere, I don't know if it was an Instagram, or you own
I own that book.
You own that piece.
Actually, I have that book. I have that book right in front of me right now. It's like, it's also used in the scenes where Taurus is at that. They're in that little box canyon or whatever, and Taurus is at the edge of it, and he's got the stick and he's trying to pull the book towards him. They use that in those scenes also, as well as where David skewers him with the spear. But yeah, I was talking to Dave, was corresponding with him just over the phone. I mean, those guys were so cool to allow me to call them once a week. I mean, I don't know how long I did. I mean, for once a week I would call those guys, and they must have dreaded it, but they were all very, very nice. And Dave really, more so, because he just always had that sort of element to him. He really seemed to appreciate people who were interested in it and did what he could to encourage them. I was one of the people that introduced Chris Endicott to him, and they had a really long career together. And but yeah, the little book came about when some friends of mine and I were at Dave's shop one night, and he was, I think they were probably maybe just gearing down on the Primevals. They were probably just going at a hiatus on that in 78, because they already had started making all of these props. They were going to shoot it back then when Charlie Band came aboard, started getting money together to shoot the film. So they were already in pre-production on it, and they had a number of items already built for the film. And I think they were also just gearing up for the day time ended. But Dave, it was really cool. Showed us around the shop. He grabbed a few work print, like extra test slugs of the laser blast aliens, like 35 millimeter film. And
oh, that's awesome.
And tore them off and gave my friends and I, copies of those. But he showed us the Taurus model, which was already in a plastic bag at the time. And I looked at it, I said, wow, it's a lot smaller than I thought it was, only about like 9 inches tall. But he starts rummaging around a table, and he produces these two pieces, and it's the book. And it's like it's in two, and it's just the back split off the front, and there's like a little brass hinge on the inside. And he told me, you just take some 5-minute epoxy and glue it back together, and it'll all be together again. And that's what I did. I brought it home, got some 5-minute epoxy, and did it, and it still opens. It still does its little bit where it can open up. And
wow.
It's really, I mean, it's an honor to have something like this. The film that inspired me to have something from it, as well as know that it was shot all around the area that I lived in when I was a kid. I tell a story that the Green Giant sequences, those were all shot. It was called mixed scale. Like I said, it's a forced perspective trick. And it was the same technique used in Darby O'Gill and the Little People. A lot of other films use it. But Dennis was inspired by Darby O'Gill and the Little People for that sequence. And they got a friend named Jim Duran to play the creature. And Dave Allen made a prosthetic for him to wear, and they got a wig, and they went to a local Woolworths and picked up a couple of rugs, and that's what became the clothing it wore. They painted him kind of this blue green colors, and the feet that were obviously from the Outer Limits episode. And what they did is they had a couple of picnic tables set up, and they put a big piece of plywood on it and covered it in dirt, and there was another piece of plywood in the front at an angle. And when they would shoot it, especially using that nodal point tripod rig that Jim had built, it would help to flatten the whole perspective of it to tie it all together, and it made it very convincing. It's so funny too, because the scene doesn't really last that long, but there's a lot of shots in it. It kind of makes it feel like it's a long scene. But after I'd seen Equinox in '71, my dad, he was a member of he had an archery club that he was a member of. And they would have these meetings over at a place called Lower Arroyo Park in Pasadena. Just below a bridge, the Colorado Street Bridge was just named Suicide Bridge at one time, but we would go there one Sunday a month, and I was just bored to tears. I mean, archery, and we'd have, they had a great breakfast and lunch and stuff like that, but a lot of people get together and they do their archery bit, and the kids would run around and we'd play and stuff like that. And I found out many years later that the Green Giant sequence, as well as a lot of the original version, was shot in Lower Arroyo Park.
Wow.
And I realized I've been eating my lunches off of the picnic tables that they used for the Green Giant scene. And like, here I am, I'm like bored. I hate that place so much. And then all of a sudden I'm like, I love it. That place is so cool. I can't believe it. And Maggie and I, when my fiance Maggie and I went there a few years ago, and we did a little Equinox day and went to some of the locations, and a lot of it still looks the same these days. And the picnic tables have been replaced, but for the most part. And at the end of the film, there's a scene before they get to the cemetery. David and Susan, they find this wall in the middle of the forest with a doorway in it, and they go through the doorway, and then they end up at the cemetery with the big cross. And that wall is in Lower Arroyo Park also. And it was one of those things that always haunted my memory, because I'd seen Equinox, and then I saw this wall, and I didn't really put it together. And then years later, I have these weird memories of all of this stuff. And I went on my Google Maps, and I said, so it's 50 years later. What are the chances that if it's there, or if it was there, what are the chances it could still be there? And I looked at Google Maps, and that wall is still there. Wow. And the day that Maggie and I went out, that wall is there. I got some photos of it, and it's actually much steeper. The ground's been eroded quite a bit. It's behind an archery, it's behind an archery target. So you got to be careful. There's nobody there, firing off arrows if you're doing there to check it out. But still, it really was. I mean, wow! The hospital is a place called St. Luke's on Washington Street in Pasadena. That building's still there. That cemetery is in San Marino, around the area where part of Invasion of the Body Snatchers was shot. That same cross has been used in the Psychic Killer, as well as
Oh yeah, I've seen
Alfred,
that one.
yeah, Alfred Hitchcock's Family Plot.
Amazing.
Yeah, so that place, that cross is still there. Um, um, and it's great to see some of these things still exist to
Of
this day.
course. Yeah,
You know,
especially now with so
yeah,
many rebuilds and knocking things down that
yeah,
they're, that piece of like your like town history,
yeah,
and just your own childhood.
sure,
We really appreciate you coming on and like
yeah. Thank you.
sharing your love for this film.
Sure,
It's definitely a great foundation for you and like all the fantastical things
yeah,
you have done, since
appreciate it. Thank you.
that, was ignited within you.
Yeah.
So I do have one last question.
Mhm. Yes. Uh-huh.
My question to you is, now the film ends and then there's a question mark.
Mhm.
Now, was that something, because I know this does happen, was it more from the producer standpoint, or is that something that actually Mark had wrote? Did he write another part to the story? Is there more to it? Or do you know anything about that?
I'd always been told about a different, maybe, or at least I thought that I'd read that there was like a different ending to Equinox. And I asked, maybe I asked Dennis or Mark or somebody about it, and they kind of told me that no, it's not really different. It's just that that when Jack Harris got it, he just cut a few um, seconds off of the end because they go to the black, because that question mark, the end and then the question mark is actually a Jack Harris trademark. If you watch the Blob, if you watch
Oh yeah.
Dinosaurus,
Yes, that
if you
is.
watch
Wow.
the 4D Man, all of his films end with a question mark. And Equinox was no exception. He ended that with a question mark also.
Signature.
And yeah, and but yeah, it was Jack just, that was he's a showman in him. I mean, he was a fun guy to talk to. I mean, I told him in '78 one of my goals was to work on a film that he produced, and 10 years later I was on the remake of The Blob.
Oh yeah, that's an
Yeah,
amazing movie too.
so I got a credit on a Jack Harris film, so they met that goal. And before we go, I want to make sure and add that some new stuff coming up.
Oh, I was just about to ask you, do you have anything future projects you're working on?
Well, future, who knows what's going on in the industry right now? I mean, actually, yes, I do have something in the future. It's a crowd fund. The Kickstarter should start up for it. Producer director Jeff Broadstreet, who had done some of the Night of the Living Dead remakes and I believe Night of the Living Dead 3D, and he did a lot of other really good cult films. He is going to do Robot Monster 2053, and the sequel to Robot Monster.
Okay.
And yeah, so that is not in production yet, and it's going to be crowdfunded. I'm still waiting to see when that starts up, but it should be soon. That'll star Bill Oberst Jr. Bill's another wonderful guy. But next month, obviously this year the Primevals came out finally. The Charles Band, David Allen film. Yes. I ended up working with Dave Allen, the Primevals in 1978 when I first saw it. In 1994, I went to Romania and worked on the Primevals. I was the makeup effects supervisor over there in Romania on it, and I ended up playing a bunch of the hominid roles also. So I actually got my first acting credit in a film.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. Hominid number 2. Actually, no, I'm like, and on top of that, I'm like every dead hominid in the film.
Well, that's at least an easy role. You just have to lay there.
Yeah, exactly. It was very simple, but yeah, now that has finally been released after us shooting it 30 years ago, and thanks to Charlie and absolutely Chris Endicott and everybody else who got it together and finally got it released, and it's a load of fun. Something, it harkens back to the days of Ray Harryhausen and I mean, this is the type of film that we could really use more of these days, and I hope to see more of it, especially with all the stop motion. It's a really wonderful film,
The
and starring
poster sold.
yeah, oh
Just
yeah,
the poster alone.
starring Juliet Mills, and I loved her on Nanny and the Professor when I was a kid, and working with her, she lives up to all of that. And I couldn't believe that in the 9 weeks that I was with her, I never once asked her about Beyond the Door. I never. So, okay, the final thing though is September 27th. September, I'm sorry, let me get this out again. September 27th, the newly reformed Anchor Bay Entertainment is releasing Abruptio, which is directed by Evan Marlowe and produced by his wife Carrie, starring James Marsters, Robert Englund, Hannah May Lee, Christopher McDonald, Jordan Peele. Oh boy, who else? I mean, I know I'm missing more people.
A plethora of fantastical people.
There really is. It was an amazing cast, and the entire movie is acted with puppets.
Yes, we saw that. We were like, "What is this future puppet movie that we?"
No, did you actually? Oh, yeah.
No, you haven't got to see it. We
haven't seen it. We just saw
a poster for it, and then
okay.
Like, I saw like Sid Haig is in it, and all
Sid was Sid's final film.
So we definitely will be sitting down, and we're gonna have to catch that definitely.
Oh, absolutely. But that will be out theatrically September 27th. It'll be a limited run, but I believe it'll be on Blu-ray immediately also, because the following day in Burbank at Dark Delicacies on the 28th, we're doing a signing party for that. But yeah, something, I mean, that's a cool one. I mean, I didn't even read the script for the film. I said, I am not even going to read the script. I'm just going to make these puppets for you. It actually, Alicia Berry and Mark Villalobos also built puppets on the film. I want to make sure they get credit also, because I built the majority of the puppets for the movie by myself, but they also built stuff for it, and they deserve credit for, credit well done, or job well done.
I'm anxious to see that one, because I always, as a kid, loved those puppet movies like the Thunderbirds. And
this is nothing like that. And these are all Head and Shoulders puppets too. It's like weird, because it's like they're not like marionette type puppets. They're like hand puppet, like Head and Shoulder hand puppets that are really weirdly inhuman. They're very off looking. I mean, they didn't want me to make them ultra realistic. They wanted things to be a little weird about them. And I don't know how I was doing, but they seemed to like it. And everybody's and the reviews. I mean, I get some of the best reviews in my career from that one so far. I think I've won. Well, we just won the Septimus Award for Best Animation last week in Amsterdam.
Congratulations!
And thank you. And the film. I mean, I won. I don't even know how many awards the film won festival wise last year. And I mean, I won. Out of the 7 awards I got last year, 6 of them were for Abruptio.
Wow.
And it's oddly, it's a bloody film. Believe me, it does not skimp on the gore. It's a very thought-provoking film too. It's really very nihilistic, very noirish in a lot of ways. It has a lot of really good black humor in it. The reviewers say that you just forget that you're even watching puppets.
Wow.
You just start kind of buying into this whole world that they've created. But it's weird because, it also involves like a whole, like maybe alien invasion plot and stuff like that. And by the time you get to the third act, the movie starts to shift and it starts to make more sense. They actually start making sense of the things that are happening. I don't want to give anything away, but I loved it. I mean, honestly, I was frightened when I went to see the screening with Maggie, and I was like, wow. It was like, I thought, wow, it's like really, like, what is this going to be like? And by the time the movie was over, I loved it. And I was just so proud to be involved in it. But you have to watch the movie all the way to the very last frame, because at the very last frame, something happens and it reveals sort of the whole the whole thing.
Okay.
And yeah, so really, it was really weird because I wasn't expecting it. When I saw it happen, I went, "That's the reason. That's it. Okay, that's why. Okay, and it made a lot of sense."
Extremely intriguing. I'm
anxious to see it because, like I said, that just sounds like I always love to see something different, and that sounds like that's very different.
Yeah,
I'm very
something fresh, not something regurgitated. Not another sequel, prequel, requel. Just
well. I'm going to add one more film onto this. This is actually something that I didn't do. I worked on it, but actually it was my fiance got the job. Maggie, she got a job building a couple of hand puppets, kind of Muppet style hand puppets for a film directed by Mike Hurst, who did House of the Dead 2, I think, and he did like these films for Sci-Fi Channel and stuff, and a guy named Pat Kuznati produced it. It's called Transmission, and it stars Vernon Wells. And we saw it the following night after Abruptio, and we sat there and looked at each other like, okay, we've both worked on a couple of really weird films, but Transmission is also, I thought it was fantastic also. I mean, I don't know when it's going to come out, when they're actually going to release it, but it's finished. And so it's another film to look for, but that was Maggie's film. I just got to write along as a credit. So I'm very proud of her for that.
That'd be a good one to check out too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely worth checking out. So we've got a great cast also, but it's a really great concept. And again, it's one of those very disorienting films, but it all comes together and makes sense.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We were glad to have
thank you.
Learned so much tonight.
Thank you so much. The knowledge
thank you.
is so amazing. I mean, we could talk for hours and hours and hours.
Well, I'm putting together, I got about 40 pages written of the Equinox material, and I'm going to use a line from a spaghetti western. It's words. Why don't you save them up and write a book? And maybe that's what I'll do with this, or a magazine article or something like that, so I can get out as much information. There's a lot more information on Equinox. It's just never really even been. I'm going to add one more thing though. This actually has to get out before we get off. Okay. One scene in the film was shot on a stage in Hollywood. The scene where Jim wakes up after going through the barrier.
Yes.
And that sequence was shot at Paramount Desilu Studios on a stage earmarked for Star Trek.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's another reason why the film has got a lot of mystery to it, and so there you go. That's the last tidbit.
We're so grateful that we watched the film. Like finally we checked it off the list, and not sorry at all. Like love it. And okay. That you were able to come on and share your love for the film.
Sure, we got to start somewhere. That was the film that started it all for me.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank
you very much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned to the horror.
And now, folks, it's time to say goodnight. We sincerely appreciate your patronage and hope we've succeeded in bringing you an enjoyable evening of entertainment. Please drive home carefully and come back again soon. Good night.